Awesome. Okay. So welcome everybody. For those of you who I haven't met, I'm kind of scrolling through names here. My name is Sarah Morefield. I am a field specialist in Clay County, which is in the Kansas City area in the urban west region. Going on 3 years, almost 3 years in that position. So it'll be 3 in April. And the 4-H All Access model is a program that actually came directly out of my first expansion review committee meeting. So for those of you who haven't done an expansion review, I know we had some people in that 0 to 3 year section. The expansion review committee should be meeting once a year, and it's an opportunity for you to bring 4-H youth and adult, as well as community partners, extension council, various people in your county, and really look at where are you programming, who are you offering things to, and where are you missing. Making sure that you're touching all parts of your county as much as we're able. So after that first meeting, it was very obvious that North Kansas City, which is our most urban part of the county, was being completely missed by our programming. There weren't any clubs nearby. There wasn't anything going on. And so when we were talking about how to problem solve, it was my committee that suggested reaching out to after schools. I had just moved to the area and wasn't familiar with the after school setup here. I only knew from teaching in St. Louis. And so they started listing off Adventure Club and Kids Zone and the different organizations that provide after school in our Clay County area. So that prompted me to set up a series of meetings. And then when I finally met with Adventure Club in North Kansas City, this was all born of that conversation. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background of why this was started, and especially why it started as quickly as it did, and with my largest school district, which was not my original intention, but the way it unfolded came out of that expansion review meeting, which also was a huge piece of the success because I already had the support of my community. I had the support of my extension council as well as my 4-H council, because it was really their idea that created this whole program. So as Eric mentioned, it is the 4-H All Access model, thinking about how we bring 4-H to before and after school, rather than waiting for them to come to us or try that they may or may not have the transportation or the means or just a guardian to bring them. So on this first page, you can see some of my 4-Hers from last year. In the bottom left corner, you can see my middle schoolers. I only get to work with my middle schoolers in the summer right now. That's something that I'm working on, seeing them more frequently throughout the school year, but we do a spin club essentially each summer with the middle school. And then I work with K through 5 throughout the school year. And so those other photos are some of my K through 5 kiddos. You'll see in the bottom right-hand corner, one of the schools actually is a 4-H bulletin board. So it showcases all of their officers and their projects and what they're doing, so that it's visible all the time for people as they come in and out. So how do you get started? I've talked about this a little bit, but I looked at districts that have an after-school organization already in place. So I was looking for people that are utilizing a YMCA or a J Club or a Boys and Girls Club or Adventure Club, but some outside entity that comes and performs their after-school responsibilities. The reason I started there was because those people have the privilege of focusing just on before and after school. And in schools that don't have that in place, you're having conversations with vice principals and teachers who are doing that on top of their daily job. It is a lot harder to get them in a meeting. It is a lot harder to convince them to take on something new. They just have a lot more on their plate. It's an additional responsibility rather than their primary responsibility. I think that this model can be successful in any school, but I do think that it is easiest to implement and probably most sustainable to implement if they have an outside organization already in place that's responsible for their before and after school care. That being said, the administrators, again, emphasize that I met with after school administrators. I didn't meet with the school administrators or the school district administrators. I met with the administrators of Adventure Club, and just focused on the staff and the partnership with the Adventure Club organization. From there, present the basics. I will say, in terms of lessons learned and things not to do, do not bring the whole Clover. Our Clover catalog with all of the projects is very overwhelming, especially if you're not familiar with 4-H, if you don't have any context for what it was. When I set it down, they kind of shut down on me. They didn't know what to do with it. They didn't know how to approach it. They didn't even know where to start. So present the basics. I think we all have our elevator speech about how 4-H is leadership and civic engagement and hands-on. Start with that. The experiential learning is speaking their language. Most schools understand the importance of experiential learning and hands-on learning. Before and after school especially understand that, because they are dealing with some of the hardest parts of the day in terms of engagement with youth, and they really have to make sure that they are doing hands-on learning, because otherwise, how do you keep their attention for 2 hours after they've already sat in for a school day? So it's nice for them to know that we have that same philosophy, but that's their familiar. So for me, bringing in the leadership and the civic engagement and the public speaking and those extra parts was what I could provide that they didn't already have, that they may have known but may not have been practicing. So showing that we shared that same philosophy in education, and then showing what I could bring extra was how we started the conversation. And then I asked them, what are they doing? What kinds of projects have they done before, so that I could determine in the Clover what I could offer that they haven't done before. For example, I was thinking the kind of your basic facts, your sewing and your cooking, those things a lot of times are being cut from schools. So initially I thought that might be a good place for me, but 2 years ago they got a grant for sewing machines and they're pretty much all sewn out. So they didn't want to start with sewing. So having that conversation where they could tell me what are some of the major projects and grants they've taken on, some of the things that they like to do, was able to guide me to go through the Clover so that I could present them with a smaller list. Once we had that conversation, then it's all about adapting. So my number one lesson learned is it is not going to look the same. Even in my district with 21 schools that are all given the same schedule, they are all doing it differently. So come up with a way that it fits their schedule and their reality, but also remember that no two programs are the same. And so they're all going to do it a little bit differently. So knowing what I knew about after school, having taught some after school programs before, you have about a 30-minute golden window. So you take in transition time, snack time, homework time, and then when pickups start, and you've got this like 30-45-minute chunk of time that you probably have almost everybody there on most days. So when I looked at what I wanted them to complete, I made sure that it could fit in a 35-minute window. If they're having a great day and everyone's staying and they work an hour, that's wonderful. But I try to make sure that I'm not taking more than a 30 to 45-minute chunk of time, because that's what's most likely their reality. Knowing that 30 to 45 minutes isn't as long as we usually like to work with kids, I knew monthly wasn't going to work. So we looked at a weekly schedule and small chunks of time, so that by the end of that month, they've done all of those different pieces of what a community club 4-H'er would be doing. They're just doing it in chunks on a weekly basis. So this is how we outlined it. And again, this is adapted with the outline. They would look at each week serving a certain portion of that 4-H program. So in the first week, they have a business meeting. They do all have club starter kits because they're all chartered clubs. So they all have flags and gavels. They do all learn the pledge. Some of them have already memorized it. Some of them have posters they hang up, and some of them have printed them out. But they do all say the pledge at the beginning of their 4-H meetings, and they're run by youth officers. Similar to community clubs, I always tell them that, choose the officer positions that make the most sense. So they all have a president. They all have some sort of secretary or recorder or reporter position. But then from there, I let them decide. None of these after school clubs have treasurers because none of them have a bank account. They're not allowed to fundraise through district rules. So there's no reason for them to have a bank account because there's no money that can go in and out. So rather than a treasurer, they've created positions that make sense for them. So they might have a pledge leader or a paper passer outer or project assistant leaders. But they have youth leadership. And they have a president leading their meeting, and they are learning how to make simple motions. I told them my goal for them in that business meeting is that every month they've made at least one motion. That motion could be as simple as choosing between 2 or 3 snack options. It could be thinking about what project they want to do next, maybe who's going to do the program in the second week. but each month they are doing some sort of business meeting with the motion, with officers, with the pledges, so that that is happening monthly, just like it would be for a community club 4-H'er. Week 2 is when they focus on their program and presentations. Most of the time, this is some sort of mini demonstration or project talk. Every once in a while, they have brought in guest speakers. A lot of times, guest speakers are just other teachers in the building. Teachers who found out that they're doing cake decorating and that was a hobby of theirs, or whatever the case may be. Some of them have brought in speakers in terms of other employees or administrators, people to talk about different jobs. But a lot of times that's just a couple kids standing up and doing a couple minutes of public speaking. When we first started, they didn't fully get into their projects yet, but I wanted them to do public speaking. So we talked about, it could be anything. It could be that they learned how to tie their shoes, or that they learned how to do a skateboard trick, or they learned something in art class or in science class. It didn't have to be them teaching about something that they learned in 4-H. It just had to be them getting up and talking and teaching about anything. So that second week, a couple youth or an adult guest speaker come in and they have some sort of public speaking aspect, which is similar to the program portion of your community club meeting. The third and the fourth week then are reserved for project time. I will tell you the number one thing I've noticed is that project time happens all the time. So in almost all of the clubs, they are doing projects on a regular basis. They are doing them daily, sometimes of almost always weekly, but at least twice a month they're asked to make sure that they're devoted to some project time. You'll see my note there that the Discover is an awesome resource for this. A, it's free. B, it's not copyrighted, so you're welcome to share it. They don't have a problem with that. And C, it's already set up for generally low-cost activities in a short period of time, and they're all 6 sessions apiece. So that's been a really great resource for projects. When that's not an option, then what we've done is we've looked at our 4-H curriculum and we've adapted to say, in this foods curriculum, there are X amount of chapters with however many lessons per chapter. So we look at our office at each of those lessons and each of those chapters and identify the ones that can fit their budget, that fit their time restraint, but still teach skills in a logical order. So we're identifying for them which lessons make sense so that they don't have to do the research through the whole curriculum. They're still using research-based curriculum. We've just done the legwork to say, hey, if you go to page 5 and then page 12 and then page 25, these are the ones that are going to fit for you. Most of them have stayed relatively within that 6-session series. But there's been a couple times where they've said, hey, we want more. We need more advanced stuff. Our kids are excited. We've been doing this for a month and a half and they're not ending. We want the full curriculum for floriculture, or we've done, one school did filmmaking for almost 6 months because they got so into it and did so many extra things and brought in guest speakers and all sorts of stuff. But we always start with that, 6 lesson project idea. One of the biggest differences outside of obviously family involvement is that they are doing group projects. So it was too overwhelming to figure out how each youth was going to identify a project at each site, and we were going to be able to prepare resources and materials and lessons. So they do projects a whole group at a time. Now, sometimes they're creating individual projects, but they're all doing the same project. And sometimes, like in filmmaking, they did create one film as a whole group. But they are still getting some choice in the matter, in that they're usually given 2 to 5 choices of projects that the staff feels comfortable with, that are things they haven't done before, and then the youth are voting on which one they want to do next. So they don't have the same level of choice and independence in terms of projects, but they have some, and it's just logistically, it was the only way that made sense. So that's kind of the format and the schedule of what it looks like and what it's happening. But what I want to focus on is kind of the behind the scenes, what most of you guys are having to deal with if you wanted to set this up. All the things that we love to talk about, the money and the cost, the enrollment, all that good stuff. So we're going to transition into kind of the behind the scenes part, but I wanted to make sure you knew what it was looking like for the rest of them. For those of you who have not seen or heard me talk about this, I do have a video that showcases what these club meetings look like. I didn't want to put that in here. I wanted to make sure we had time for question and answer, but I'm happy to share that video out. So if that's something you want to see to really like, what does this actually look like? What are their meetings look like? Where are they meeting? Those sorts of things. I'm happy to share that video. It's about 3 or 4 minutes long. So logistics. This is obviously specific to Clay County. So it could look different in your county, but to give you an idea of how we operate, obviously you have money and costs. So where is the money coming from? And then what are you spending that money on? So in Clay County, Adventure Club, again, is the after school organization. They are chipping in $1,000 a year. We have a couple other all access programs that have started this year, and they're chipping in 100% of what they have. So that number is going to vary based on the restraints that they have and the budget that they have. We've set up an all access club with Spark Studios, which is a community center, and based on what they collect annually, they're able to give us the $20 per youth without any constraints for them. And so they're paying 100% of that. With Adventure Club, there's a lot more pieces to their budget. There's a lot more youth. There's a lot more restrictions from the district in terms of what they can and can't spend money on. So they're not able to put forward that 100% cost, but they do chip in every year. So they are chipping in $1,000 a year. My Clay County 4-H Council has a Hallmark donation that's annually about $1,300. So when we started this program, they voted to, from here on out, delegate that money towards dues. We've also applied for various school district and community grants. So we received $3,000 from the school district as a joint grant that we co-wrote. I also got another $2,000 from a community grant. And we have some other ones on the list that we're still seeking. And then we've worked with Extension Council to seek business sponsors. So as you can see, my funding is a little bit of a jigsaw puzzle. I don't have one major donor that's able to fund this program, so I am piecing it together. It's not ideal, but it's doable, and I don't think it's unusual for a lot of things that we do. In terms of cost, Adventure Club takes on all the liability and insurance costs as long as they're at their club meeting. So when they're doing club and project meetings, they're meeting on site in the school with school district staff. So I am not doing any sort of liability or insurance costs. They're already covered under their own umbrella. So that saves us some money if there were potentially to be an issue 90% of the time. Now when they come to fair or camps, things like that, obviously now they're on our liability and insurance plan. But most of the year they're in their school building with their school district staff. We don't have to worry about the liability and insurance. For their projects, Clay County 4-H does provide the curriculum as part of their enrollment. I don't ask them to buy the curriculum. However, they pay for all their own materials. So I might give them the lesson plans, but everything that they need, they pay for. Similarly to community clubs, if I get a massive donation of fabric, I'm of course going to offer it and share it, but there's no expectation that I'm providing resources for their projects. Clay County did waive county dues. That's something that we're keeping an eye on to see as we go forward how our county expenses are being affected, if at all, by these new members. And then as we notice if it's being affected, we can reevaluate whether or not we need county dues and at what level from these 4-Hers. But as of now, for our first 3 years, we have not charged any county dues from these after school all access members. We have all 3 years collected data on families that have the Missouri Care Insurance and could utilize insurance vouchers. The first 2 years, we weren't able to actually get anybody to call and request that voucher. Again, the family involvement piece is the missing piece in this model. I don't see them face to face. So it's harder when they receive emails from me because I don't have that context with them. This year, we have made a lot of progress in that area where we've been able to reach out to site managers and say specifically, these 5 kids in your club have marked that they have this insurance, that they would be eligible for this voucher. Will you reach out and provide the information because they know you and they have contacts with you? So we're hoping that this year we'll be able to collect some insurance vouchers because that would make a significant impact on our budget if we were able to do that. There are quite a few families that would qualify, but that's definitely a piece of the puzzle that we're still working on. I will tell you full transparency, the first 6 months we started, I did not have any fees. The state waived them entirely for me to be able to experiment with this. So that was a huge help as well to make sure that this was actually going to work before I started collecting money. And we'll talk about that in the next slide, but that's something to consider in terms of your enrollment when you first get started, before you start collecting all the money, to make sure that it's gonna pan out. It's a good fit and it's a good partnership. So enrollment, second, of been collecting paper enrollments. We've done that for all 3 years. We have provided online instructions for them to enroll themselves. We've had about less than 10 that have gone in and signed on and done that themselves. Again, without the face-to-face time in the context, that's a harder ask. Plus, I think if you offered it to most of your families, they would rather you do it than them do it. It's just one less task for them. So we've collected paper enrollments. That first year, when we had that first semester, February to May start, we did group enrollments. So I collected individual enrollments, but I entered them as a group enrollment. I wanted to collect the data in terms of Missouri Care and different things, so the form was worth it, but I didn't want to enroll them all individually on 4-H Online. It saved me having to pay fees. It also saved me a lot of time as I was making sure that this was a sustainable project. So there was a lot of benefits to doing the group enrollment. Going into the second year, or the first full school year, we did make the decision to switch into individual enrollments, which is a pretty big undertaking in the office, because now we are entering all of those individual enrollments, which is what you all did before 4-H Online if you are 4 or 5 years plus. So it's not a new concept, but it is going backwards a little bit. So we are now entering individual enrollments. And while that is more effort on our side, you can see on that enrollment when I have some kind of pros and cons, but the family parent access has been a huge deal. Having them as individual enrollments online means I have direct access to those families, whether it's emailing them about the Missouri Care vouchers, whether it's including them about camps and events and sending them newsletters, but I no longer have to ask their club leaders to print and distribute. I can email directly to them just like I can to everybody else. It's one less task to ask of the club leaders, which is helping our relationship because they have less extra to-dos. And it's also an easier direct path for me to the families to start building that relationship up. Finally, it opens doors for them if they want to attend a camp or a fair or something like that. They're already in the system with their individual enrollment. The downside, of course, is now we're looking at $20 a child. So there's a big jump in budget from group enrollment to individual enrollments. But right now we are committed to trying to find those funds and maintain individual enrollments unless we absolutely just can't. In terms of volunteers, we are using the site managers or the assistant site managers as club leaders. So the site managers and the assistant site managers are all full-time staff. They are required to do professional development. They are required to maintain certain certifications. And so they are the the stability at each site. So I and myself and Brenda, our instructor, work directly with these site managers. It's up to them if they want to train the people below them to take over. So they are trained to be the club leader, and they can take that and run as the club leader, or they can take that as a train the trainer session and go to their site and say, hey, this person is a better fit, or this person has a better, schedule for it. I'm going to train them with what Sarah trained me. So that's up to them. I assume that they're leading it unless they tell me otherwise. Most of them have actually kept it with their managers, their site managers. The second biggest percentage would be assistant site managers. I think I've only had 1 or maybe 2 out of the 23 sites that have used their part-time staff for this. So most of them are doing it as full-time staff, which makes it a lot easier on us as an office and also makes it more sustainable because they're more stable in terms of employment, who the kids and families are seeing. As far as the school and the school district, teachers and administrators have been pulled in for judging and guest speakers, but they are not officially doing anything in this capacity. So many of the sites do judging at the end of every project, just in case those youth don't make it to fair because they're not in summer school or they're out of town or whatever the case may be. So they host mini conference judging and supply ribbons and all of that throughout the year. And a lot of times teachers are being pulled in for that. We're also utilizing A+ tutors, so teens that require service hours, and they're going in to help lead projects. Some of them have even or inquired about more of like an assistant club leader. So with A+, that is something that had statewide regulations initially about having to be math and reading oriented. That was loosened up, but some districts have maintained the initial regulations. So that is something that I had to go district wide, and I had to reach out to the coordinator of A+ tutors for the district and request permission that 4-H be counted as A+ hours. It was honestly a very easy conversation, but it is a conversation that has to be had if you want to utilize A+ tutors. Other options are reaching out to leadership groups within the high schools that have to have service hours with less formal regulations. And we've done that as well, and worked with some groups that have gone specifically to their feeding schools. They wanted to start relationships with the elementary schools that were going to lead into their high school. And so those teens have gone after school and helped with specific clubs and sites because they wanted to start that relationship. So we have used high schoolers in the last couple of years in various capacities, but mostly just as project leaders. The fourth column you'll see is working with our nutrition program associates, working with our 4-H snack team, which is new in the Urban West region, as well as our Healthy Habits teams, which is a national grant that we've been working with on both sides of the state, in Urban East and Urban West. And those have been teen-led, staff-led, volunteer-led, but those are different project-specific initiatives that we're able to then offer to our clubs and say, hey, our 4-H snack group is teaching kids in the kitchen and eating from the garden. If those are projects you want to do in 4-H this year, this counts as 4-H project, and we're going to be able to supply someone to come in and teach for that 6-week session. So that's been really nice. It gives our club leaders a nice 6-week break. They feel like they're being supported. They don't have to focus on the project and the club management. But they know that it's not something I can supply them all year. So we try to kind of space out those offerings so that they're getting that nice break. They're getting some help and assistance coming in. Soccer for Success, which will be kicking off in spring, would be another awesome partnership there where, there might be schools interested in doing that, and that could be operated as one of their 4-H projects. But again, they're going to have some other people coming in or volunteers designated for that time. So there's lots of options. I could see a lot of national grants, the pollinator grant, lots of different things going on that would provide both project material and volunteers that could come in and lead projects. So that's been really successful for us, not on an all the time basis, but just to kind of mix it up and supply help throughout the year. So I want to make sure we have lots of time for question and answers. So I'll leave you with my why try it. When I started in Clay County, we had 7 community clubs and 143 members, and that was pretty consistent. We'd been pretty stagnant. Our clubs were strong, but we weren't growing. So we had a couple key parts of our county that we were programming in, and we had a good presence there, but we weren't reaching our most rural area. We weren't reaching our most urban area, and we were having a hard time doing more than maintaining. So we started this model in 2018 with just the North Kansas City School District, and that bumped us up to 26 clubs and 505 members. The 2018-2019, we added another after-school club in North Kansas City, as well as a couple community partners, and that brought us up to 679 members. So obviously, it's been a huge success for us. Every county is different. Every community is different. Like I said in the beginning, this came out of expansion review. So I started with great support from both my extension council and my 4-H council, which makes a world of a difference. But it's definitely been worthwhile in our county in terms of growing our numbers. We've said from the get-go that we don't separate our members from community club members and after-school members. They're all 4-H members. They're all welcome to come to camp. They're all welcome to come to fair. So I do report my numbers just as you see, as one lump sum of clubs and one lump sum of members. And I do that very intentionally so as not to create kind of 2 tracks of 4-H within our county. In the past year, we were able to add on to the program by bringing them to fair. And actually we were able to save on a lot of the liability costs with that because we worked it in as a field trip. So it was still covered under the North Kansas City School District because it was one of their official summer school field trips. And each site came out and they went through conference judging. They went through project table stations. They received ribbons. They saw a few of the different pieces of fair, but most importantly, they were able to show off their mastery and to be rewarded for that and recognized for that in a way that they hadn't been yet. And that made a huge difference in their buy-in, but more importantly, it made a huge difference in the club leader buy-in and them seeing that, you know, this was meaning something to their kids and this looked different than just another STEM activity, which they could pull out of any resource book. So that was a huge addition for us in the last year and something we'll continue with. So far, we have not had any attend camps, but we have had them attend countywide and regional day events. And we're hoping to increase participation in all of those areas and add participation in camp this year. So I want to make some time to have questions from you guys about how this might look in your county and what you're thinking as you look at this model. Is this something that you think is replicable? Is there something you need from me in order to replicate it? Or what kind of questions and answers do you want to go through that would be most beneficial to you guys? Because that's why we're here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. A whole bunch of great ideas in there. Two things I didn't want to escape. I just threw them in the chat. The idea about using A+ tutors. You got a little more investment with them as they do have to complete their community service hours, a little more accountability perhaps. And then, yeah, great, awesome idea with the field trip that the school is covering the liability. That's definitely something people are concerned about with that. Another thing, I did share the results of the poll. We have representation across the board, and hope you can see those results. And as far as Q&A, you have two ways to do it. You're welcome to unmute yourself and ask the question, or you can drop it in the chat and we can go from there.
I'm totally good with either option. So if you guys want to start chatting or start typing, just let me know.
I have a question. Do all your volunteers go through 4-H online and register as a volunteer, like your site managers and your A+ tutors and all that kind of stuff?
My site managers do not, because they're covered under their own insurance and liability when they are leading, and they're not leading anything outside of the school day. My A+ tutors do, because honestly, because I think it's way more beneficial for them to go through the training. They have way less experience. I do an in-person training with them to make sure that they're prepared. And then I do put them through the system and they count as youth volunteers, because that's a new demographic that I'm reaching. And I want to make sure that that's showcased. I've considered having the site club leaders go through the volunteer orientation and training and having them official. Right now, I don't see a big enough benefit to ask them to do that. And I know it would be a rather large ask. So I've kind of weighed the options there. And at this point, I have not, because they're never doing something outside of their school day that I am not or another volunteer is at to cover us.
Just to chime in, that's definitely the best way to approach that with your thinking. They're not leaving the school, so they are covered by the school.
Yep. Now, if some of them decided that they wanted to come to camp or get more involved, then I would ask them individually at that point in time. But as a whole group, I have not asked them.
Here we have, you see that in the chat?
Yes, I do. So Jennifer, I do not have one with individual schools. My relationship is with the Adventure Club organization. And so it's with their administrators, and it's a district partnership in that sense with that branch of the school district. So I don't have 21 partnerships. I have one partnership that has 21 sites. And then I have a partnership with my 2 additional ones that I've added on separately. So that's something that you'll have to look at with your county, though, whether or not you have that overarching organization or not, whether or not your MOU and partnership would be with an individual school or a larger entity.
It's definitely a good find to find that umbrella organization that covers all the schools.
It makes a huge difference in terms of buy-in and meetings. You know, when their administrators bought in, then everybody came with them. Not everybody came willingly at first, but everybody came with them, and there was an expectation from their administrators that they were going to play along. And you know, I feel like after fair, I can honestly say that they've all bought in, which is really exciting. But even before they'd all officially bought in personally, I had the support of their administration. So that was a huge help. Jennifer, my Hallmark donation, obviously I mentioned. The other two grants, one was through the school district, so I could not apply for that on my own. It's a school district employee grant, but I found the grant by Googling and searching for options. I was looking at their foundation to see what there could be, and so basically I wrote the bulk of the grant and then sent it to the after school club administrators. They reviewed it and added in the pieces that needed to come from them, and we co-submitted. Now I will say on those grants, they're looking for buying the fun stuff. They didn't want to cover dues. So we applied for partial due funds, but also applied for some robotics materials that were more exciting for the foundation to purchase. And then to offset that, Adventure Club was able to give me a little bit more out of their budget for dues that year because they weren't supplying projects. So you have to kind of play around with it. The other grant was Harrah's Casino is in North Kansas City, and they have a large community foundation. So that was the second grant that we were successful with. So those three partners, Hallmark, Harrah's, and the School District Foundation, have been where I've gotten my money from so far. I am working on a Monsanto grant, but again, that's one I can't apply for, so I had to find a partner to apply for on our behalf. And then I'm also looking at the Walmart community grants. That's one that I just need to go in person to the individual stores and make those connections. So that's on my to-do list. But the Harrah's, the North Kansas City Foundation, and the Hallmark are my three current success grants. Tanner, in terms of suggestions, I would definitely start with the school district foundations. They may or may not allow you as an outside person to apply, but most of them have some sort of grant. What I've found is if you're willing to do the writing, they're happy to help you submit it and partner, but a lot of people are uncomfortable with the idea of writing a grant. That's not something they've done before. So depending on their comfort level is how hands-on you have to be in that process. I don't have the benefit of having, you know, a Joann's or a Tractor Supply, but I think if you have those national 4-H partners, those are obvious places to start and say, hey, you know, would you as a local entity support us in whether it's materials or, you know, some other way. But what I'm looking at now with my extension council is business sponsors. So rather than grants that are a little bit less stable, where you don't know what their fund is from one year to the next, my extension council suggested that I look at business sponsors. So look at businesses and organizations nearby each school and see if they would do, you know, would you sponsor this one club? You know, that's $200 for these 10 members. That's not a huge ask of a local business. And so that's the route that we're going this year. But I think looking at, you know, those community organizations and, you know, those different ones that might put in, definitely ask the school or the school district or the organization to put in some money, but just be aware that their budget, their finances, their setup are drastically different from one to the next. So have that conversation, figure out what they can provide, but don't go in assuming that they're going to have 100%. They're just very different situations.
That's a great thought, looking at those businesses that are close to the schools. Definitely they want to get, you know, they want to show the community that they're connected and you know, it's a great way to make some community partners too.
Yeah, and the national grants, I will say, like the Healthy Habits National Grant and the Pollinator National Grant were both opportunities that were able to directly support my All Access members. We did the pollinator activities at the fair, and they were all able to get that. So that was one way to provide materials and project expenses. I couldn't pay dues with it, but I was still able to support those youth in that way. So definitely keeping an eye on what those national grants are that come out. And some of them are much larger tasks than others, but there are definitely some that have fit as great support for this program for us.
And did I hear right? Then you're looking at the local businesses to support or cover the membership costs or sponsor a club?
Yeah, and that's what I will be honest, that's the hardest ask. Everyone wants to
Right.
pay for something exciting. They don't want to pay for the dues, they want to pay for the excitement. And so one suggestion that Lupita had when I was talking to her is, I know that Adventure Club is willing to pay for the dues, the boring part. So if I can find people to pay for the exciting, the program expenses, the projects, the materials, then I can alleviate some of Adventure Club's budget constraints, and they could pay me more towards dues if I was finding people to pay for the other things. So thinking creatively about how you ask for money. They want to support the ribbons because that's exciting and it's fun. So if they pay for the ribbons, do you have more money somewhere else from someone else that you can shake up to pay for the dues that maybe doesn't mind being the more boring donor, for lack of a better word?
Great. Other questions on getting started or having that initial conversation? What would you say, Sarah, was perhaps the hardest part for you diving into this?
I think getting organized. So North Kansas City is my largest school district. It was an opportunity I didn't want to turn down, and I honestly didn't feel like I could refuse. But starting 21 clubs at once, 3 or 4 months after the first conversation, was huge task organizationally. At the time, I was the only employee in Clay County. So I didn't have any YPAs or instructors. It was just myself. So getting those pieces and those resources together was the biggest task, in figuring out how I could support them genuinely and to what they needed without dropping all of the other balls I was juggling at the same time. I think going forward, being on year 3 and also having staff now, and honestly a huge piece of why I was able to hire a YPA was because of this program, because I was able to show growth in my numbers. But having a second person to help get stuff together, to answer emails quicker than I can when I'm out of the office, to make sure that we're showing up every 2 or 3 months at their site manager meeting, to actually go out to sites every once in a while and see what they're doing. That's made a huge difference in our relationship and the support. But now as we add new clubs, we have so much of this already created. And so that is a lot easier. I'm not constantly looking for curriculum. I have curriculum selected that we've used successfully, and I have a bank of resources, things that have been created by myself in the office. And honestly, the best part is this year I'm starting to see my club leaders create stuff. I gave them a curriculum and they've added on. And so now they've shared those activities and I've added them to the resource bank. And so the organizational process is a lot smoother, but that was the biggest task for me and the biggest challenge. And a lot of that had to do with just the quantity that I was starting with. If you get to choose, I would start smaller for your sanity. But again, sometimes we don't get to pick who says yes. So I didn't feel like I could walk away.
Yeah, absolutely not. Definitely getting that first one under the belt. Probably, yeah, definitely would open up a whole bunch of different opportunities. Yeah. What are some of the thoughts out there? Questions? Thinking about how that might look in your county.
I do have a infographic that outlines what that schedule was. Stephanie, I see you're on here. I know that you've been waiting for me to send you the editable one. My younger brother created it for me. He's finally back in the country and is able to make that editable. So that's something that I can share out as well. I previously did not know how to make it editable myself, so that you can actually put your own information on the bottom. So that's a project that he's working on actually this week for me, to create it in a way that you could put your own contact information. So if you do like that once a week setup, I have a nice little infographic that goes along with that. Jennifer asked about handouts that help with this process. Yes. I have a parent letter that I combine with the one-page enrollment. I have the infographic I just mentioned. Initially, when I first started, I kind of created a a Y4H sheet that was specific for the site managers and to get their buy-in. And I also have the curriculum that we've worked on. So I have all of those resources, and I'm more than happy to share if you send me an email or comment that you want it. What I am working on this year as my goal is to get it all in one booklet so that I can physically hand it to you, and then you can go out and replicate it on your own, and share those resources. So that's a goal of mine on my personal plan of work, is to make it so that it's understandable for other brains and other places. But I'm happy to share everything I have now. It's just not all formalized as beautifully as I would like it to be, but that's in process. Jennifer asked about the S drive, Eric. I don't have the answer to that.
It varies. I mean, definitely documents would fit. This video I will put out on YouTube just to save space, but I think there's room for documents and guide sheets like that as well.
Okay, and then I do have 2 different videos. One video showcases just these club members doing projects, meeting, saying the pledges. I mean, honestly, it showcases them looking like 4-Hers, and kind of explaining the model with a voiceover. So that's a 3 to 4 minute video that I have in a Google Drive right now because it's too large to email, but could be placed, you know, maybe on the S drive or on YouTube or somewhere else for access. And then I did create a smaller kind of what is 4-H video. And that one I use more to show the kids in my new clubs and the site managers in my new clubs. I use that more for an internal training of, you know, showing them that 4-H already happens in a million different places, right? Our clubs meet in churches and schools and barns and fields and libraries and zoos and wherever their community club takes them that week or that month. So showing them that it looks different already in a lot of different places and showing them what some of the projects look like. It's just a real short, sweet clip, but it's a nice visual for them to get that, you know, if they've heard of 4-H, they don't have to make their 4-H look like that one thing that they've heard of. And if they haven't heard of 4-H, here's all the possibilities. So I do have those videos as well. But again, they're harder to email, so I can send you links to those.
Sure. And I want to take something off your plate. I'm happy to be the conduit of information as things get placed in S drives or YouTubes or Googles.
Great.
I can definitely follow up and share with people.
Okay, so I will work with Eric on getting resources all in one place and making sure that that's shared out. Any other thoughts or questions?
Yes. To me, it sounds like the hardest part is making that first conversation or even finding that person who's willing to have that conversation.
Yeah, I went to a couple of meetings and they didn't have the time or the money or the brain space to think through it. And then I went to North Kansas City and they'd heard of 4-H and they'd seen it actually in Kansas working in on one of their military bases. And honestly, they kind of felt like they were waiting for me, so it just kind of all came together. Jennifer asked about in terms of position taking it on. I don't think that it has to be a specialist versus an educator versus a YPA. I think that just depends on A, your relationships. It depends on B, your workload. For me, I think creating that initial partnership and having that first conversation as a specialist probably helped connect the dots with the office as a whole. That being said, I'm a specialist who's housed in one county. So if you're a specialist who has 3 or 4 counties and you're not housed in 2 or 3 of them, it might make more sense for the YPA or the educator who's housed there to be that initial ask. It is a big task, Jennifer, but it's also getting smaller. The longer I do it, the more I have to gather, and the smaller the task is getting because I'm able to go and do trainings every couple months. And the nice thing is their trainings happen during the day, which is when we're not doing our programming during the school year. So I can go from a 1:30 to 2:30 meeting and meet with the club managers and bring them more resources. And then they're doing this completely on their own. I'm not going to any of these club meetings. I get invited every once in a while and I make it if I can. But they're really, they're doing it on their own, just like any other club leader would. So I think that question's really going to vary on your personal to-do list and your connection with the community and how you split that up. As we've grown in Clay County, a lot of these responsibilities have transitioned from me to Brenda as an educator. And some of those tasks are now split between the two of us, where I'm trying to work on the resources for you guys. I'm focusing my time on creating the things that you need in order to replicate it. And Brenda's focusing her time on responding and supporting the club leaders. So we're both working on the program, but in two very different aspects. And so that's one way that we've changed as I've received help. But it is going all on its own. So I don't put any more time or effort in than I do to any other community club. I have never been the one to teach, ever. I've never gone in and led their meetings. I've gone in and observed, I've taken pictures. I've helped out with an activity or two because I was already there, but I myself have never led a project meeting or a club meeting for any of these.
Hey, Sarah, it's Jennifer.
Yeah.
So would you say by what time would you start talking to after school officials and things like that to when things were going in place? Like, would you start talking to them in the beginning of the school year in August, September? And then from that time, when were things actually in motion?
Yeah. So
how much time should I plan to be talking?
Right. Yep. I would say I have been most successful September, October. August is a no-go. They're too busy. There's too much. They're getting back to school. And summer is hard because either they're out of the building if they're...
What about, can I interrupt you real fast? Would I be able to start talking to teachers right now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Would we be able to, you think, get this going maybe next semester?
I mean, my first year, that's what I did. I started conversations, I think mid-October. I started getting it going and we kicked it off beginning of February. So we had all of January for everyone to get back and get settled and me to check in and say, okay, do you remember what we talked about? Do you have the form you need? And we did it February to May, the first year. And then they honestly didn't even do it over the summer. So they had the same kids for the summer and they needed the brain space to say, okay, we took on something huge. We're not going to focus on it. So they didn't meet during the summer months. The second year, they got back to school in August, but I didn't look for forms until October. Some of them sent them in September. Some of them sent them in October, depending on how much time they needed to get back to some sort of stability with their kids and their program and their schedule and behaviors and all of that. And then a lot of them did projects over this summer, and some of them still said, I need that couple months break. So I think this time of year is ideal. If you get too close to the holidays, expect them to say, hey, can we talk later? But I think it's still worth putting out the ask. It's still worth just kind of creating that thought, putting it out there for them to say, hey, this is great. Now's not a good time. And then what I do is I put notes on my calendar that says, hey, they told me to reach out again this week, so that I remember when their task or when their timeline was good and follow up. But yeah, I would say this time of year for next semester, they're planning their summer, usually March, April. So if you want to trial it just in the summer, you want to make sure you're talking to them once the holidays between February and March, and say, hey, I've got this idea. Why don't we try it in the summer? That's also when they're doing a lot of their beginning of year planning. They kind of do it all in one big chunk. Because summers are so crazy for them. That's their full time, that they don't have as much planning time for the fall once summer hits.
Now, Sarah, when you go to visit the administrators, do you have any marketing materials, any flyers, or something to put in their hand in case they say we want to talk later?
Yeah. Again, don't bring the Clover, but the one pager of projects is great. So the one pager that Sherry Grace created with all of the projects listed in different category areas, without the descriptions, without all of the details, just the actual content areas, I bring that, and that is definitely something that they want to keep. I bring an example of the parent letter, and I bring an example of the one-page enrollment form so they know what I'm asking for them if they were to say yes. I also give them the opportunity to supply edits. So I created all of this based on North Kansas City. As I grew to other community partners, I told them, hey, this is what North Kansas City and I did. Does this make sense for you? Is there some fields changed? So I play around with those documents. And then that last piece is that infographic that shows the statistics of why after school is such an important partner, as well as that club layout of what does it look like each week. So those are my 4 main pieces that I bring with me and then leave behind.
Super. We are getting close to the 11 o'clock hour. Are there any other questions out there? Seeing none, I have one more comment. I was watching the chat. For those that might be thinking, gosh, this is a super big task. I don't think I can do it on my own. My suggestion would be don't start with 21 schools.
Yeah. Ask your small partners.
Sure.
My community center that I work with, they only do after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They only offer it twice a week. They do younger grades on Tuesdays, older grades on Thursdays. That has been such a simple start compared to my big ones. So it doesn't even have to be a school district. It could be a community center or an organization that's offering after school on their own. But yeah, if you can, start small. But, it happens the way it happens, so.
And that's a good thought too. Once you get that one under your belt, then it becomes a bragging point to all your other community contacts.
Well, and I've had a lot of success, even though different schools and districts in the area utilize different organizations, all of those after-school organizations meet. They all talk, they all network, they consider themselves colleagues even though they're hired by different people. And so once I was able to get into Adventure Club with North Kansas City, she's now speaking on my behalf to Kid Zone and to Rock and Tigers Club and to the other organizations in the county, and they meet regularly. So not only is she spreading the word, but my colleagues in other counties in Jackson County and Platte County, she knows people in their counties as well. And she's helped us set up meetings with them to be the go-between so that our email doesn't get lost because they don't know who we are. So I've found that it is a much bigger network than I realized. I kind of assumed since they were all hired by different people, they wouldn't necessarily connect, but I was wrong. So they all know each other. And once you get that foot in the door and you get one of them in that network, they're a huge help.
Super, super. All great information, Sarah. I want to thank you for coming on and giving a little more detail and taking time to answer questions. And definitely for everybody that was able to join us, thank you for making a little time with us this morning.
Yeah, definitely. And I will work on getting that stuff out. I'll share with Eric. Keep an eye out, but don't hesitate to email me if you want it sooner than I'm sending it. I'm happy to share.
Very good. And I will, when I'm finished here, I'll go ahead and start working on the video and I'll post it on the YouTube, and I'll follow that up with an email to everybody and let them know where this resource is in case you want to watch it again.
Great. Thank you, Eric.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.